Broadcasting from the Any Hour Services podcast studios, I'm your host, Mike Wilson, and on this episode of In the House, we're going to be talking about water heater expansion tanks. Let's go. In the House is a podcast about the major systems in the house: electrical, plumbing, heating, and air conditioning. Each week, I'm joined by a panel of experts. We pick a topic and we discuss it in depth. It's meant to be informative and hopefully bring you some value. Today, I've got Dwayne, Scott, and Ricky with me. Oh, were you waving?
Hi.
Sometimes you'll like do that to get my attention. You're like, wait, don't forget this.
Hi.
That's the first time you've ever waved at me when I've said we got Dwayne with us. Anyway, these guys are the managers over the plumbing service department at Any Hour Services. An expansion tank is not part of a water heater per se, but it is a common component and a required component for a tanked water heater system, correct?
Yes.
That technically wasn't your first question. I know I kind of threw it off because I turned that into a question. We're going to be talking all about these expansion tanks today, what they do, why you need them, stuff like that. So let's start out with the basics. For those that don't know, Scott, tell us what an expansion tank is.
All right. So an expansion tank is something that's on the water system that protects it from expansion and contraction. So as a water heater
now, you said
up,
protects it, and you said water system as the subject of that. So the expansion tank, is it protecting the water system or the water heater?
The whole system
is protecting the system.
Yeah, the water heater is what creates the expansion and contraction. As water goes in the heater and heats up, you're creating more volume, more space, and more pressure.
Okay. And
so therefore you need somewhere for that to go. So you'll typically find an expansion tank on your water heater, and that's there designed to protect the entire system, including the water heater.
What other things besides the water heater would it be protecting?
The entire plumbing system, because water, when it's heated, is creating more space. You're increasing the pressure in your water system completely.
Oh, I got you. If
your pipes, your faucets.
Gotcha. And it'll probably become more clear as we talk about this. So if the expansion tank wasn't there, because of the way our systems are designed now, and they don't have the flow doesn't go back to the city, it goes elsewhere in your home. And so it could cause excess pressure on fixtures and different things like that. That's why you say it's protecting the whole system.
Correct. Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay. So why do we need an expansion tank? Because we were kind of discussing this before. Like, is an expansion tank, is that a code requirement?
Yeah, definitely is. It's in the code. History on that a little bit is from, I can remember it coming into the 98 code, and where they started talking about it. By 2004, it was definitely code. And then long about 2010, even the manufacturers of most water heaters are now printing on the sides of the boxes. It must be supplied with an expansion tank.
When it comes to plumbing code, are plumbers like electricians? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I remember every time there was a code change made to the electrical code, it would be essentially like that. You hear rumblings of like, oh, they're going to start requiring this, they're going to start requiring that, and the electricians are like kind of grumbling like, why are they doing this to us? And then all of a sudden, like, so you say 98, you start hearing it like coming into the code and things like that, but then it's kind of readily acceptable or accepted in early 2000s.
Right. And really what happened is after 9/11 in 2001, the pretty much the Homeland Security wanted all the water departments to secure their water systems.
Really?
And so one of the changes that really happened is the way they're now metering the water coming in. And most of the water departments went through, at least here in Utah, I don't know how extensive that went, but most of the water departments started installing a one-way check valve at the meter. So before then, the question is, well, why do we need them now and we didn't back in the day? Well, before then, if it thermally expanded, there weren't any check valves on the system. Even a pressure,
explain what a check valve is, just for people that are listening that might not know.
Yeah, so a check valve makes water flow one way and will not let it flow backwards the other way. And so even some people consider the pressure regulator in the home to be a one-way device, but there's a little teeny bypass hole they used to be. I don't know if that's still currently that way or not, where the water could pressurize and go back into the city system. And we weren't concerned about thermal expansion. But once they installed that check valve at the meter, and along with that, they did all the radio frequency. You go out to your meter cover, and there's a little wire. If you ever pull your meter cover, there's a wire that comes up and everything. So now they just, instead of having to go and open a meter physically and look at it, they just drive by and it uploads into the computer.
Do they have to drive by and stop, or can they like just be driving whatever the speed limit is and it just like picks everything up?
I have no idea on that.
Because I'm wondering if it's like the Google car that you see going around taking pictures of the Earth.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't either. It's a good question.
Yeah.
Great.
I got good questions.
You do.
I'm the host.
You do.
Host with the most.
So anyway, so that's why we needed them. We need them now more than ever.
Okay, so it used to be that the way that our water systems work, water would come into the home, and if there was any excess pressure, there was a way for it to overflow back to the city, to the source where it was coming from. Right.
Correct.
Then they started installing these check valves that did not allow that excess pressure to go back. And now all that pressure, it creates a closed system with the plumbing, and all that pressure is trapped in your house, but that pressure is still trying to go somewhere. And that's where it becomes like, what happens when you've got pressure building up in the house? Like, why is that a bad thing? Which would explain, I guess, why we need these things. But why is all that pressure bad?
I think the question we went to was, why do we need them? And it's safety is the biggest part. They came out with the expansion tanks, and the manufacturers have now adopted that we have to have them on the systems in order for the units to be warranted. Am I correct with that, Dwayne?
Yes.
So, of course, it's a safety thing, but what are some of those potential, what are the potential things that could go wrong with that excess pressure in the house?
Well, think about
In the house is the name of the show. I didn't even do that on purpose. But hey, it happens sometimes in the house.
I like it.
I do too. That's why I stopped the show to point it out. Okay. Anyway, so what are those things that could happen?
Well, I remember being a kid, my mom used to bottle all sorts of things, and she would use a pressure cooker. And that thing always scared the crap out of me because it would build so much pressure, and she'd have to go and tap on the little relief valve so the thing didn't blow up. In essence, that's what this closed system is now becoming. And if there's no way for that excess expansion to release, then we got some major problems going on. There are stories out there of water heaters turning into bombs and missiles and flying out of houses and things like that when the system is not able to release that pressure or be in containment and work properly. So it is, like Ricky said, it's a huge safety thing.
I read one factoid on that I thought was kind of interesting, that it said that water in a closed tank at 50 psi, when heated to just 10 degrees more, will reach 250 psi. That's not much. I mean, that 10 degrees more in a closed tank, if you can imagine that, 250 psi, they're rated and tested at 300 psi, but you could easily, if you went to 20 degrees, you would easily exceed that 300 psi if there weren't any other of the safety devices like the temperature and pressure relief valve on the system.
Well, we also talk about the importance of having the right water pressure in the home. Aside from safety, if you've got excess pressure on the components in the house, is that not also shortening their lifespan as far as like the valves and the not gaskets, what are those little the washers and things on the fixtures and things of that nature? Doesn't that shorten the lifespan of those? You can start getting drips and leaks and things of that nature. Would that also apply here with this extra pressure that's being created?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it comes through the city, through the reducing valve into the water heater, and then it disperses out through. And then when you have your pressure back, if it has the expansion tank on there, I think it's like 0.53 gallons just in a 40-gallon tank as it's heating up, that it will go back into the expansion tank. And when you open the system, then that water will come back out of the expansion tank. That allows for they say that at a certain point that the tank itself of the water heater, the welds and things can rupture inside with minimal amount of pressure. So that expansion tank is critical in many aspects of the plumbing system throughout the entire house.
Well, it's interesting that we talk about the pressure that it creates. It's like, and you bring it up, we put that pressure reducer where the water comes in, and then we have this thing that's creating all kinds of new pressure inside the house, that we now have to relieve. And the way that we do it is with this expansion tank. So let's talk, how does someone know if they actually have an expansion tank?
You'll find that right above the water heater, on the cold side is where it should be. And it looks, we have one sitting up in front of here, but those that can't obviously see that, it's a cylindrical device. They're typically tan or blue. And it's just a tank that has a rubber bladder on the inside. And so it looks,
if you're listening to the show, just Google water heater expansion tank and you'll see exactly what they look like. And if you go down to wherever because you don't have to put them on a tankless water heater, right?
If it's recirculating, you need it.
Controversy?
Controversy?
Is this like a controversial topic?
Maybe. There's some new codes that are
there's
coming
code
out.
changes and things that are happening
in 2018.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yes.
Maybe not first, but
that
you
are,
heard it here.
That are requiring them on all
hot water systems.
Yeah.
That was a new revisement to the new code.
So only if your tankless has a recirculating pump on it?
It's saying no matter what.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Yeah.
See, that's
a new one that I just discovered. So.
When does that go into effect?
Well, most of the cities will adopt it. It's the 2018 code, so they'll adopt it in 2021. They always adopt it 3 years later. So
That's
most of the cities will start using the 2018
So what I said
code.
in the beginning, as far as it being part of a tanked water heater system, incorrect.
lied. It's
I didn't
incorrect.
lie. I was misinformed.
You led us all astray.
I did.
Stored water, I believe, is what it was originally, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Stored water in a tank.
So it started out as any stored hot water system, and now it's moving to any hot water system. Period.
Mm-hmm.
It's been batted back and forth in the last every 3 years. They update the codes. In 2012, it got deleted, and then it was nobody really knew for 2015 code, and now 2018 they're addressing it again.
Expansion tank gate.
Yep. We'll see how that goes.
Anyway, a better description of the expansion tank. They're about 10 inches.
Better.
Sorry,
you did a
Wayne.
really bad job,
well,
Scott.
they're about 10 inches round. So if you go in and you're looking at your water heater and you see a tank that's about 10 inches round and about 18 inches long, looks like a little barrel kind of a thing. Some of them are bigger. They're depending on sizing, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But you're looking for that kind of a tank somewhere, usually above the water heater in the system.
How you said late 90s is when, and early 2000s is when it was widely accepted. So if someone's home is older than 20 years and they haven't had their water heater replaced since then, chances are they don't have an expansion tank. Is that
Possibility.
Yep, very good possibility.
Yeah.
okay? So my next question was going to be, how do you know if you need one? But you guys are saying that, like, according to code, everyone needs one of those now.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, there you go. Go look, everybody.
Short answer.
It was. That was a good one. Okay, so next question. As far as these expansion tanks, yes.
Back to
For everyone that's just listening, Ricky raised his hand. I'm recognizing him now.
how do you know if you need one? If you want to
You guys told me it was a super short answer and told me to move on.
Well, I had a little segue here. If you want to be proactive and protect your investments, your water heater, your system, your fixtures, everything throughout your home, for one item on your system, this is probably one of the most important ones to have, and that's why they've now adopted it and require it for manufacturers and things. And it's really, really important that everyone have one.
One of the things that I don't understand is that we still come across water heaters where they don't have an expansion tank on them, or they were installed improperly. Let's talk about the installation of it real quick, because just because your home is newer than that, it is a good idea to go and check and make sure you have it. But let's talk about let's talk about proper installation, improper installation, like what it can be done wrong, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we go into homes all the time and we see it on the hot water side.
Okay.
Now maybe, and we didn't look up every manufacturer. There might be some manufacturers that allow it on, but the three that I looked up at all want it on the cold water side. Sometimes we go in and find them on the hot water side.
Weren't you guys? We do so many episodes of this, I can't remember, but like, weren't you guys the ones that told me that like when it comes to water heaters, there's really only 3 manufacturers out there?
Of water heaters, yes, but of expansion tanks,
Oh,
there are more.
So so the water heater manufacturers say the expansion tank goes on the cold water
I
side.
don't know what they say.
Local code says on the cold side.
Got it.
And the manufacturers for the expansion tanks.
I see. I thought you were talking about water heater manufacturer.
I looked up 3 different ones, and I believe there's 4 or 5.
Okay, gotcha.
But all 3 that I looked up said they want them on the cold water side of the water heater. We find them on the hot water side, and the problem is that heat, anything that gets heat, expansion, contraction, is going to wear out quicker than it doesn't. And so if it's out on the hot water side, it's definitely going to wear out quicker. Probably not perform as well.
I have a question about that, because yes, the expansion tank is installed on the cold water side, but if you have a tank full of hot water and it's creating excess pressure, and it's only going to be coming back if that pressure is high because it heated the water up, would you also not be sending hot water back to the expansion tank?
It really doesn't. The heat doesn't migrate back through on the new water heaters. They've got little what are called heat traps in there. That there's little flappers inside that keep the water from migrating back up and keep it going in one direction.
Sounds like they thought about
But
that.
they're just little rubber things. They're not considered a check valve.
Sure, no, I got
But
you.
they're just little rubber flappers that help control that heat.
That was a really good question.
That was a
Mike.
good question.
I think you researched that before you got
I didn't.
on.
I'm just sitting here. The logic that you're using is like, no, hot water heats things up, and I'm like, well, you got hot water going back to it. But I was wrong. You don't. You got little rubber things in there.
So the inside of the expansion tanks, they do have a rubber bladder in there.
Okay.
And when you look at an expansion tank, you'll see a couple of welded seams on there, or a welded seam. And that rubber bladder is attached to that welded seam inside. And then half of it's epoxy coated on the water side. And then on the non-water side, where the rubber bladder expands and moves up into like a I don't know, a billow, or anyway, like a balloon blowing up inside of a jar kind of a thing. That side is not protected with epoxy coating because the water's not supposed to get in there. So one of the things that we see, and then it's really important to install it properly, to position it properly is another thing. They can go in any position, but the smaller ones we call them the 2-gallon tank, and they hold about 2 gallons of water if everything was fully expanded. So 2 gallons is 8.3 gallons pounds per gallon. So you're looking at 16 pounds. And so you kind of do need to support either the piping or the expansion tank itself. The larger one, the one we call the 5-gallon one, it holds 4.8 gallons. And so you're looking at close to 40 pounds of weight. And so if you've got plastic piping or PEX piping or something and it's perched out there, and should it rupture and fail and fill totally all the way up, it could be 40 pounds. And that's heavy. That's a lot of weight.
How is it supposed to be supported? Is it that strap that's got the holes in it that like goes around it and ties up to the joist, or? It
can be any means of support. Either support the piping on both sides if it's a vertical.
I come from Louisiana, and we do some really strange things there.
Hey, it could
duct
be
tape and baling wire.
Straw string and baling wire.
It can.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome.
Wire.
That's my kind of install.
Just something. I mean, we typically use the plastic perforated tape on it, because that's just one of the things we carry on our truck and use extensively in what we do. But especially if it's horizontal in direction, you definitely need to have that supported and an extra strap somewhere around that.
But you're saying some of them are installed up and down instead of popping out to the side?
Right, up and down. Then all you're needing to do is support the piping so that the piping couldn't sag if that totally filled up. So those are, that's kind of where your proper install goes.
Okay.
Then with calibration, it's really important to calibrate them properly. One of the things that we see all the time, especially on the new construction houses, we go back after a house is 2 years old. They call us out because they want to remodel or add a basement bathroom. We start checking pressures, and they come pumped up from the factory at about 35 pounds. And the reason they do that is because it's a pressure vessel, and they keep it at the right amount of pressure so that as it travels on trucks or through air or however they're shipped all across the place, they won't overly expand and explode. So it leaves plenty of room for expansion, but they need to be pumped up to match the house pressure. And so before you ever install one, you've got to check the house pressure and know what that is, and then you pump up the expansion tank. There's on the end of it, there's a little bicycle tire kind of a valve, a tire type of a valve in there that you could just use a hand pump on and then pump it up to the right pressure.
Can you use the tire pressure gauge that you got in your glove box that you never use to go and test that, or do you need something a little bit more calibrated than that?
I've always gone digital with mine just because it's hard to tell the difference between when you're wanting to get around 60 to 70 PSI.
Got it.
It's hard to tell on the one you use. Are we at 60? Are we at 62? Or are we at 68? It's kind of hard to tell.
That makes sense. So let's talk about that a little bit more in depth, because if someone's listening to this episode and they want to go check and see if theirs is calibrated properly, because there may be somebody that's in a new home, and you just described an example where, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you're in a newer neighborhood and there's not a whole lot of homes in that neighborhood yet, maybe you're one of the first ones, and the city supplies a certain amount of pressure. I mean, can't the pressure change over time as far as like how much pressure is coming to the house? Or would it be steady or regulated by your pressure reducing valve?
For the most part, regulated. The system is pressurized, the cities, and it constantly changes based on the additional homes and subdivisions and everything. So it is a fluctuating system that's monitored on the city side. So it'll be fairly consistent, but the regulator is what's going to protect your home from that movement.
Got it. Okay. So when you go down and you check, let's talk about the proper way to check. You said put the pressure gauge on the little end to check I'm going to say tire pressure, but the air pressure. I've heard some people say that like you should open a valve in the house somewhere to get an accurate pressure. I've heard some people say that you shouldn't. What is our take on that?
Well, it is a two-part system. If you're going to check your expansion tank, you need to know your water pressure first.
Okay.
So make sure you're getting a good pressure reading. It's also good to know your static versus dynamic water pressure.
Explain that.
That's a whole different conversation.
Sounds technical.
Basically, running water versus water standing.
Okay.
When it's just sitting and everything's not working. You need to know what that is to be able to set your expansion tank.
Let's just assume that somebody listening is smart enough to like do those calculations. Walk me through static pressure versus what was the other one? Dynamic pressure. Okay. What should the difference in those be, and how do you calibrate your expansion tank to that?
So we are going to set it off of stagnant pressure when it's sitting pressure. That's what we're looking for the expansion tank. So we don't want anything running. You need to know what that is.
We actually do, though, need to open up a faucet first and then shut it off, and then
to relieve any pressure that has built up.
Equalize.
To see what
That's a good word.
Our baseline is.
So once that's set and ready to go, you can put your pressure gauge on down at your water heater out on a faucet that, I mean, it can't have an air gap type of a issue, a vacuum breaker, because that could also throw off your reading. So your laundry tap's a good place to check it.
laundry tap at the water heater.
The water heater, there's a valve. As long as it's not plastic, be careful there because that could cause some issues. Anyways, that's where you want to.
Okay, so check what that pressure is, and if it is 75, you want to set your expansion tank air pressure to 75. You want those to be about the same.
Correct. And if you've got your water on and everything, you really should, when you calibrate that expansion tank, it shouldn't have water in it or pressure on it to calibrate it necessarily. You want to get the water off to the water heater or take the expansion tank off to be able to truly calibrate that to the correct water pressure.
I think that's what the debate was that I was looking up online, where they were saying when if you try and add air to it to open a valve so that you don't have a false pressure reading. But you're saying shut the water off coming in.
You have to have 0 PSI on your system.
So is that done by just shutting the water off, the cold water coming in?
Yeah, shut off the cold water, open up a hot faucet somewhere that will relieve the pressure on that side, the hot water going out, and also on the expansion tank. That'll get you to 0 pressure.
Since we're covering this and we have all the experts here, what's your thoughts? Do you shut the water heater off, gas, and get your heat off of it to bring it down to?
Yeah, you should go ahead and turn your thermostat down to vacation.
Right. Okay.
So that just the pilot stays on. You don't want it to be coming on while you're trying to do all this calibrating, because that 10-degree rise in temperature, brings it up, 200 PSI, very quickly. And
when another just technical thing, when you open that faucet up somewhere in the house, that hot tap, do you leave it open, or do you just open it so that it relieves the pressure? Like let it run 5-10 seconds and then close it again? Because if you've got the heat turned off, it's not going to be creating more pressure. You've got the cold water coming in. That's not going to create the pressure. Do you just open it to relieve it and then shut it? Or do you let that water run while you're pumping it up?
As long as the water's out of it, you know there's no pressure built up in it. If you're concerned about it, just leave it open.
Okay.
It's better to err on the side that there's nothing in there and get a proper reading.
I guess you could
shut it off and have it expand
open the water heater tap down below, couldn't you?
Yeah, you can do that too. I like to just get it to where it's drained down somewhat. I mean, the pressure's
the water heater
on the hot water faucet, where you can obviously tell when the pressure goes and then it's just dribbling. But then I shut it off because I don't necessarily want to drain our 2- and 3-story homes all the way down to a basement faucet.
Gotcha.
Kind of a thing. And so it as long as you're at that 0, no pressure on there, and the thermostat is turned down on that, I think we're good.
A minute running an open hot faucet, gives you a void at the top of the heater and lets the water relieves the pressure.
And it's a good point. We've all noticed, like if you're running your water hose outside and you shut the tap off and then it just slowly loses the pressure, is that what you're saying?
Exactly the same thing.
Exactly the same thing. I made a perfect analogy.
Perfect analogy. Sometimes we find that the expansion tank is on the back side of the water heater valve or on the more towards the cold water inlet side. And in that case, you would have to shut down the whole home in order to be able to get to that 0 pressure. We try to put ours after the water heater shut off valve, just so that it's easier to service and maintain.
Okay. The other aspect of it, you mentioned that there are different sizes of expansion tanks. How does someone know what size they need, or if the wrong size was put on?
Yeah, so generally speaking, any 40 or 50 gallon water heater, a 2-gallon expansion tank or that smaller one is going to be just fine. If you jump up to, if you're at a 75 gallon, you're kind of on the fence. It would be better to err on the side of, we don't see too many 75 gallons that are still being installed out there. Most of the time, at least here in our market, they go with 240s or 250s. And at that point, you've got 80 or 100 gallons, and that's definitely the 5-gallon expansion tank. I've done some boiler systems before where, that expansion tank was, 6 feet around and 8 feet tall. on
Holy
that
cow.
thing. Yeah, for this, for huge boiler systems where there's two of them that tandem off each other and things like that. And so it's really important to have that, that expansion tank sized properly. If you get beyond that, there are charts that help you size beyond that. But generally on our residential side, that's
probably beyond what most people are going to come across. But you did bring up a common thing here, 240s, 250s. Do you have an expansion tank per heater, or do you have an expansion tank for the system? Like one at the cold water coming in, and then it goes and feeds both water heaters?
Usually just one.
One's
Just one.
sufficient, yeah.
If you have 240s, that equals 80. Do you all of a sudden go to that bigger 4.8 gallon or whatever?
Yeah.
I always used the bigger unit when I was with two water heaters, no matter what the size.
Yeah, me too.
Yep.
You just ignored sizing.
Well, no, it's what the sizing charts show. Don't ignore it. We just know.
Oh,
just
man,
know.
I'm kidding. Okay, so how long do...
As you're getting stink eye across the table.
How long do expansion tanks last? Or how long should they last?
That one's on me. There's many factors.
So you're saying it depends.
No, I don't use the word depends. We already covered that. Installation.
I couldn't resist.
Let's go back to installation. As
It depends on the installation. I got you.
we talked, Dwayne had talked extensively about installation. That's one of your factors on how long they last. Water quality. Calibration is another big one as far as the expansion tanks go. It's half air, half water, and you want to keep it equalized to the system. It's like anything else, your car and all the dynamics of tune-ups and keeping everything up to date and running smoothly. Same thing with an expansion tank. As far as how long they last, there really isn't a definite answer on how long expansion tanks last.
Well, with all of those different factors that affect the lifespan of it, the expansion tank will last until it stops working. And so it just kind of brings back you to the importance of checking it.
Maintenance will help anything last longer and anything that we touch.
Well, let's talk about maintenance, because what kind of maintenance do these expansion tanks required? They sound, when we describe them, they sound like a really simple system. There's not a whole lot to it. It's a tank with a bladder, and if you pressurize it right in the beginning, it's doing its job. So, but tell me what the maintenance is that we do on these things.
Oh, you always want to go down into your mechanical room. I've always kept an eye on all of my equipment my whole life. So when you go down in your mechanical room and you're looking at your system, you're going to see that expansion tank, and you can see if there's any seepage going on throughout your connections and things
What
like
does
that.
seepage mean? Like, tell me what that looks like.
If you're looking at a couple of fittings, you could see some white corrosion and things like that, seepage around
So you've
fittings.
got a little bit of a leak. It's seeping out.
Yes.
And
Calcifying.
you're getting that maybe hard water buildup or different, or you see signs like if the copper's turning that greenish color.
Correct.
Okay.
And your pressure in your house, if your PRV, pressure reducing valve, regulating valve, doesn't keep working properly, you can get those spikes in pressure, and it can affect the bladder inside. So I usually will check my expansion tank a couple times a year and pull the cap off the top, make sure that my pressure is equal to what the pressure is in the house.
So from what you just described, the only maintenance you're doing really is just testing it.
Visual and testing the pressure in it. Anything else you can think of?
I guess when I think of maintenance, though, I think of like you're doing something to it. So like I get that you're like looking at it to see if it's failing. That looking at it seems more like an inspection versus like what maintenance do we do to it.
Well,
Does that make sense?
It's all just
like with maintenance, you change the oil in the car as part of the maintenance.
Yeah, there's really not.
But when you look at the dipstick, that doesn't do anything.
Inspection.
that's an inspection.
Yeah, that's
I
a good
don't
point.
No, I'm just trying to
that's
understand.
I read one thing in one of the documents as we prepared for this that says you can wipe it down with warm soapy water and a rag once a year.
What does that do?
keeps the
keeps
deposits
the
off of
corrosion
it.
from the outside going in. If you get things going from the outside that could penetrate and
Weaken that
and
tank.
weaken the metal from the outside going in.
Sounds like maintenance to me.
I know that's amazing.
You didn't describe that though. You said you go and look
That's
at
why
it.
we have a
But-
trio here.
but we definitely
I agree. That is maintenance. I'm just wondering what wiping it down does, and that was a good explanation.
it just helps keep things clean.
Tossing me a life preserver.
It's amazing how much maintenance on things are just clean. Like keeping things clean is like maintaining them. You know, dirt is a killer of all kinds of things, or rust, or seepage.
You should, one of the other maintenance things that's not pertaining to the expansion tank, but you should pull that pressure and temperature relief valve every year and make sure it's working, because that is the ultimate safety device on it. I mean,
When I was looking online, that's one of the ways that you could actually might be a sign that your expansion tank has failed, is if you start getting seepage or leaks coming from, if your PR, or what's that thing on the T&P, if your temperature and pressure valve is
dribbling.
So it's releasing, that means that the pressure is building up. It could be that your bladder has failed and it's full of water now, so there oh, I get it. That is something that old people would laugh at.
Sorry,
Are you saying Dwayne's old?
Well,
Yes, I was. He laughed at a bladder failing joke. And it wasn't even a joke. He just heard somebody say, when your bladder fails, and Dwayne's like, I know what that means.
Sort of like how big the load is.
Easy.
gosh, you guys are making me turn red again.
I didn't do
That
it.
was
That was a
come on.
harmless conversation.
That was like 5 months ago.
Well, no, I was literally, how else would you describe the bladder inside not working?
Diaphragm.
No other way.
Well, your bladder fails.
The bladder fails.
Anyway,
It's actually a
That
diaphragm.
was funny.
Diaphragm,
It's
isn't
a
it?
diaphragm.
It's
Yeah.
a diaphragm.
is it? So we shouldn't even be calling it a bladder.
Yeah.
Correct.
Not if you want old people not to laugh. Diaphragm is probably more appropriate. Nope. Never mind.
Okay, so when you're testing the air pressure with your little tire gauge or whatever, if you ever have water spray out of it, that is a sign that, like, okay, the diaphragm
Has failed.
has stopped.
The rubber
working.
bladder has failed.
Okay, so I don't even remember where I was
one,
going with
one
this.
of the things, I mean, on that, when we are
Maintenance.
testing,
Yes, maintenance.
if you do find that it was up to the right pressure at one point in time, and then you test it 2 years later or 3 years later and it's down, we often at that point do not want to try to bring that up, because that rubber bladder in there has stretched and has stretch marks on it. And when you try to pump it up even more, it could
That
stretch
could
even
cause it to
more, and the
pop.
stretch marks
Rupture.
are a weak spot, and they can do that.
That's a good point. Okay, so where I was going is with the original question that you didn't want to say it depends to, with how long these things last. It just kind of goes back to the importance of going down and checking the pressure once a year, or is that standard? Ricky, I know you are an
I'm
overachiever. You go and do
Couple
it.
times a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
The manufacturers recommend a couple times, but I mean, at least a minimum of once a year, everything should be checked. That might be overachieving and things, but in order to check it properly, there again, a homeowner would need a pressure gauge and a pressure dial that would screw on to the hose threads on either the water heater or the washing machine, and then also a digital or a really good calibrated air pressure checker.
Where would they get? Because we've talked about the water pressure, the one that screws on, looks like it's got a female hose thread on the end of it that swivels and screws on. Has a round gauge with a needle in it. But where would they get one of those digital air pressure? I'm thinking like AutoZone or something.
Yeah, that's
AutoZone
where
is not a
that's-
sponsor of the show. If you'd like to
That's
be,
where I get mine, is
Absolutely.
auto parts stores,
Mike
hardware
Douglas.
stores would probably have them
everybody missed that.
over in their air compressor section.
Okay, sounds good.
I just let it go.
Yep.
You just let what go? I'm looking for sponsors, man. How are we supposed to spread the message of this without getting sponsors?
The auto stores do carry the higher end pressure gauges.
Okay.
Yeah, don't buy a cheap one. I had one blow up.
Yeah,
Like literally.
99
What's it,
cents.
end shot out
It
of it.
shot
or
right
something?
out
Oh,
of
that's
it.
Yep. The little white thing went boom.
Yep, did not work.
that's awesome. Do most guys
You
care?
you also want to be careful when you're checking that with your your tire pressure gauge. The water that if it has ruptured and failed, the water can be dark and black almost, and can stain your clothes. And
Oh, gotcha.
and I've had that happen to me in front of a customer, and the customer said, "Yeah, I think I need that replaced." And yeah, we can look into that, but that water is sometimes been.
Would that water be hot as well, or because of that system of the water not going backwards that's hot? Would it do you need to worry? Do you need to
It can be hot. I mean, age makes everything not work quite as right, and so in age,
bladders fail?
hot water could come back out.
Wouldn't be the water, the highest temperature water in the unit, but it could be warm.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other final comments on expansion tanks in general? I mean, we covered a lot of stuff. Yeah.
One of the things that you can tell if your whole system has failed on your water heater, and I don't think we've ever talked about this one before, but
Your whole system has failed.
the
What do you
whole
mean?
water heater has failed.
Yes.
Is sometimes we'll get people will say, "Wow, I heard like a big bang, almost like an explosion."
Yeah.
And we call that the water heater imploding.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever walk down and you see that the pipes on your water heater should be coming straight out, if they're crisscrossed towards the vent pipe, or crisscrossed towards the inside, that water heater's done. And what's happened inside is it's imploded. Parts have bulged, and the tank has bulged and gone. It might not be leaking, but it has bulged. Often the bottom of the water heater, down at the bottom, it has a cone that comes up. Often there's a bulge that comes down out of that and is now hitting the burner. Very unsafe. I mean, it's just, if you ever see that, there is no fix other than replacing.
So the pipes coming off of the water heater should be straight.
It should be straight. And
At
I've seen
least
them,
the first part coming off of it, because then you use flex
Yeah.
lines to come off. So
but if you see them leaning in or out,
that's a bad sign.
then it's a bad sign. Your water heater's done. It's not safe at all.
Got it.
Even though it might still be running, might still be working, it's not safe.
Got it. Let's see. That's the show. Anything else?
Do you remember when we talked about water heaters a few episodes back, quite a few? I had told you I was over at a customer's house.
Yep.
And they had no expansion tank and
Up
no
in Park City?
reducing valve. Yep.
Blew the windows out or the doors out or something like that?
Yeah, I
It
got
was
it.
in a garage.
Man, you are really hitting on all cylinders today, Mike. But
Wait, in a good way?
yeah, in a good way.
Oh, okay, good.
So I open the garage door and I look in, and I'm sitting at about a 30-degree angle on a pedestal, and the whole side is blown out to where I could just see everything inside. And the pressure from the street was 150 psi, and there was no expansion tank, and TMP had failed. But to see the parts of the water heater embedded in the drywall in the garage, and a refrigerator right there, to where somebody could have been getting something out of that refrigerator, just always made me realize the importance of all the safety features that we can put on our water heaters, because they are dangerous.
It's so easy for people to think, that'll never happen to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
What, you want to charge me how much to add this on here, or to bring my water heater up to code? Why is it so expensive to do this and so expensive to do that? Yeah. Chucking a truck down the street will come and just swap the tank without doing any of the updates and things like that, and he'll just charge me bare bones. And you get what you pay for on those types of things. And so it's definitely worth being cautious on those things, because it is dangerous. Who's going to be walking by when that thing decides to go off?
That's a great avenue to close on, for sure.
That's the show. We'll be back next Tuesday with a new episode of In the House. If you'd like to know more about Any Hour Services, visit anyhourservices.com. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today. Ricky, Scott, Dwayne. I've been your host, Mike Wilson, and you've been listening to In the House.